Quick Locks featuring Chris Fallica today joining us. Great to have you. Very excited to take your time with us today. We're going to talk a little bit of the big games this weekend, a ton going on. But we're going to start, what's comfortable with us. We're both headed to Jacksonville tomorrow. Big game there, obviously. Georgia is 22.5-point favorites versus Florida. Could be the largest spread in this rivalry's history. What are your thoughts on that and that big of a spread?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are, again, I probably take the standpoint of Georgia, the big game next week against Tennessee, and it might be a little bit of a look-ahead type situation where they pull some starters and basically just do enough to win. But I would lay the points here with Georgia. I don't have a ton of respect at all for the Florida defense. We've seen LSU light them up through the passing game, and obviously St Bennett and the Georgia offense kind of struggled a little bit lately with some of the injuries that they've had at receiver. But I can see this being one of those like slow, methodical 31-7 type games, something in that regard. Look, I know a lot of people think Anthony Richardson could give that defense problems because they haven't been as good against the run this year as they have in the past. But I would feel pretty good actually about laying this point because I think the majority of people will think in a rivalry game it's too many points. But I don't have a good feel about this Florida team at all.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a historically bad Florida team. When you look at the spread, they were 10-point underdogs to Tennessee, which was the largest in that rivalry, and now what could be the largest in this one between Georgia and Florida. We love it as Georgia students, obviously. I like them laying the points too. I think Kirby Smart definitely has an edge over Florida in his first 6 meetings between them. He's only 4-2 straight up, but the times that he's beat him, he's blown him out,
right.
Winning by an average of 24.5 points. I like Georgia to cover as well.
Yeah, I think one of the only things Florida has going for them is their rush, and obviously Georgia is really not going to let that happen. So they are such a great rushing team, but how do you think that all balances out between Georgia's defense and Florida's so-called awesome rush?
Well, I think I would favor the Georgia defense because I think one of the bigger issues that I think you've had with Georgia's defense this year is they haven't been that finely in tune unit like you had last year, but that's only natural. I mean, you break in 7, 8, and whatever many new starters it was, and you lose leaders like Nakobe Dean. Everybody just knew what everybody was doing at the same time, so it's going to take time for their defense to be in lockstep like they were all this. So I think every week they're going to continue to get better. And they're probably going to be peaking at the right time
right.
As you get towards next week's game and as you get towards the SEC title game, if they're fortunate enough to beat Tennessee next week. But yeah, I worry about the Florida offensive line here. Hopefully, I haven't heard anything. Maybe you guys have heard about Jalen Carter's status. He was going to be available this week or not. Obviously, anything they can get from him is a massive help as well.
Yeah, Jalen Carter and A.D. Mitch on the offensive side of the ball, 2 key players that Georgia's definitely going to want back, if not this week, next week against Tennessee.
Yeah, and so before we move on from Georgia, just your thoughts on that Georgia-Tennessee game. We've been lucky that we haven't really sweat out a game yet this season. And I think the envy teams that
Missouri was
that wasn't an enjoyable sweat though.
That was so funny because that morning I'm watching the noon games and I'm watching like all these close games. I'm like, that's so fun. Like it's getting boring playing out this. And of course that night I'm like, I regret everything I said. Like I didn't mean it. But yeah, so we have this awesome game coming up. What's been going on with people at, in Bristol? What's been the deal there?
We're looking forward. I'm assuming we're going to be there next week, barring a massive upset. So we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. I think all the pressure in this game is going to be on Tennessee. Which I think is rare. I think people are going to point to the win over Alabama and it's kind of saying, hey, it's Hooker's Heisman potentially to win if they can pull this upset. They can get to the SEC title game. They can be the playoff team. A win is massive for them. I think you're going to get a lot of people thinking that Tennessee's offense is going to go down there and put up a number and win. And that's a great situation. It's weird because I don't think anybody – Georgia's number 1 in the country. They're defending national champion. They got so much pro talent all over the field. And I don't think anybody thinks that they're like the best team in the country. Like, if you would put people on the spot, like the people are saying, oh, who's going to win the national championship? I think Ohio State is the most common answer for people. Mm-hmm. So it's very rare that you get an opportunity as good a team as Georgia is to kind of feel slighted and build up some motivation and emotion based on perception. And that goes a long way in the lockers. I could really see this game next week. The Tennessee offensive line isn't really great, and defensively, I still think they have some problems. So we'll see if Georgia's able to run the ball and really control up. That's going to be the biggest matchup, I think, next week, is how well can the Georgia offensive line push around the Tennessee defensive line in that front seven and keep that Tennessee offense off the field. I think that will be the biggest question.
Yeah, going back to who you think is going to win the national championship, Vegas obviously thinks it's Ohio State too right now because they have them at plus 175. Mm-hmm. I was surprised in Vegas to see that Georgia was plus 200. That's a pretty big gap. So next week could certainly change those odds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it is. I'm sorry. I think some of that too is that Georgia's road is a little bit more difficult than Ohio State's, and that's kind of baked into the odds that Ohio State has the game this week where they're north of a 2-touchdown favorite at Penn State, and then they have the Michigan game, which is at home this year, and then they'll be taking on a Big Ten West team who is not very good, whereas Georgia's road is Tennessee and then Alabama. So I think that's probably why it's what actually before the year started, there was actually a prop out there, a prop bet. It was Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio State versus the field. And it wasn't that big of a price to lay. So I'm like, I'm going to lay this right now because I can't make a case for anyone but one of these three teams to win the title. So I feel pretty good about my position there.
Right.
What value did you get that at?
That, I think it was right around maybe 215 or 225 or something like that. That was what that number was. It wasn't ridiculous. I mean, because you're looking at the top three teams on the board to do it. So it was like you're going to get probably at least 2 and maybe 3 playoff teams.
Yeah. I think the other thing about Georgia kind of getting slighted in that was they haven't proved yet that they know how to like win and then win again and like, reload the way that Bama has proved that, or Clemson used to prove that too. So I think until we get there again, we will always be slighted in that spot a little bit.
All the years of falling short, and I like to give David Fallica a hard time too about 2002, and I'm sure I'll bring it up on the show on Saturday about it's like he still has nightmares about the 2002 game against Florida where they probably would have wound up playing Miami for the national championship had they won that game. So he still thinks about that quite a bit, and I know it's in his craw. Yeah,
definitely. So we mentioned Ohio State, another big rivalry where one team's kind of just year after year been having the edge. Ohio State, Penn State. Do you think Penn State can cover their spread, which is, I believe, 15.5 now?
I think a lot of people are on Penn State this week because you saw Penn State's defense last week really step up against Minnesota and Mo Ibrahim. But at the same time, Minnesota started a quarterback making his first career start. This is a much different animal. You've got Stroud, you've got all the receivers, 2 legit backs. It was a one-dimensional Minnesota offense last week. And I know people are pointing to the whole James Franklin's done really well ATS against Ohio State, but I don't think his offense is as good this year. I don't think Clifford is a big threat to throw the ball downfield. Their backs are better than they've been, but at the same time, I think this is a very comfortable Ohio State win. I would lay the points here with the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I think the only stat that made me think maybe Penn State is they've never lost by more than 14 points other than one game in recent history. But again, you're right. It's a different team. It's a different offense. So I think you can only take that and run with it so far. I think Ohio State the same way.
If Penn State, so they don't have a great track record against top 5 teams, 1-19, 2000, but that one win was against Ohio State. If Penn State can keep it close early and get the crowd into it, do you think that there's an upset watch there, or do you think it's too good?
Absolutely. And I was there for that game in 2016. Wow. And it's funny because the game was just kind of like a sleepy, weird game, and Ohio State was up double digits, and it was like, okay, here we go, this game. And then you had the block, the punt, the field goal block, and it just completely spun. And you're sitting there at the end of the game, you're like, oh my God, Penn State is going to go to the Big Ten championship game now. And it was totally, remember too, Penn State at that time had 2 losses. They got blown up by Michigan. They had lost to Pitt. So nobody really knew how good that Penn State team would wind up being with Saquon and some of the other players that they had there. But you're right. It is a massive home field advantage in that building. I wonder if it's a little bit muted because of the start time being early and not late. But yeah, the start is everything. If you get it, I mean, this is going to be Ohio State's most difficult road game. I mean, if they can get to Stroud and force him to off timing and whatever, it certainly would help their ability to potentially hang around and maybe pull an upset. It's what a lot of people out there naturally are pulling for. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Great value.
Yeah. Other than Georgia, obviously, I've always been an underdog girl. I'm always going to pull for Penn State's basically my 13th grade from my high school. So always rooting for the friends over there.
Well, I'm glad. It's funny because you have that connection, and I have that connection with Penn State as well. I have a lot of family in Pennsylvania who that's how I got initiated with college football. Was watching Penn State football with them, and that was a team they knew and loved. And I was just a kid from Long Island, and we didn't have very much college football there. But so like Penn State football was my real introduction to college football. So I always kind of have a little bit of a soft spot for them as well.
Yeah, me too. So, and moving on to where you're headed this weekend, Southern at Jackson State, really big game for a lot of reasons. The second time you guys are visiting an actual HBCU campus. And I know, there's been this momentum to try to hit these schools that you guys don't typically hit, which I think has been great. And I'm sure you've been excited about that too.
Yeah, no, I always say when people always ask, like, what's the best place you've been or what's your favorite place to go? It kind of sounds like a stock, corny answer, but it's true. Like I always say, it's any place that we have never been or have not been in a long time. Those are my favorite places because it's new for us. It's new for the fans. It's new for the teams involved. So, it's and this is a look, I don't want to say that we're in the beginning of the year, we're pinpointing, hey, you know what, on October 29th, I think Jackson State's where we need to be. Certainly the schedule needs to break out, and there can't be this monster showdown somewhere and you're going to bypass it. But when these opportunities present itself on the schedule, like it did earlier this year with Appalachian State, like it did this week with Jackson State and the HBCU. I mean, I remember we did the Southern Grambling game. I think it was 2005, but that game was actually in Houston because of Katrina. We did it. We did a Florida A&M game 1 year in Tallahassee. In the midst of it's funny because we hadn't been to Tallahassee in a long time because that was right in the midst of when Florida State was kind of going through their transition between Bobby and Jimbo and really struggling. So we were in Tallahassee and went to a FAMU game, and the atmosphere was great. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. And look, Deion Sanders is a big name in football. He's been mentioned for FBS head coaching jobs. We'll see if that transpires. He signed a couple of really big time recruits, and it's kind of just a peek behind the curtain at some of the other schools and how we all get tied up at how it's Power 5, FBS, big name schools, and the FCS schools in Division 2 and Division 3, they love their programs and their fanfare and get excited for their games just as much. So it'll be fun to be able to go down there and kind of put the spotlight on that.
Yeah, totally. And any early predictions of how you think that game plays out? Do you see Southern having a chance here?
I would think it'll probably be a bit on the higher end scoring wise. The kid at quarterback for Jackson State spins it pretty well, and I know Southern typically is a team that has a pretty good offense as well. I can't be I don't want to lie, I haven't fully digested this game and broken it down, but just based on what I've seen in terms of scores and historical trends and things like that in the situation, it's a big route. I would expect there. The one thing that could keep it down and lower scoring than expected, though, it is supposed to rain on Saturday. I don't know if it's going to clear by the time the game comes or it's going to start after, but I know rain was in the forecast. So if you're looking to play that game, just make sure you check the weather before you fire anything in.
That's good to know. Yeah, that reminds me of your guys' Clemson scare a little bit. I
Oh,
asked Lindsay Lloyd if I could come that game because it's like an hour away and research with Marissa, and she was like, "There's just so much chaos with the hurricane right
Yeah.
now. Absolutely a different time this year. So hopefully next week you guys will be."
I was going to say next week we'll take you up on that offer. But yeah, that was and the funny thing about the Clemson day, it turned out to be an okay day.
Right. That's the stuff.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, overnight I think it rained a little bit, but it was a beautiful day on Saturday, and so that's okay. We'll come to you next week. We'll make it easier for you. Save your gas money.
I drove up to Clemson for that game day, and I was very comfortable in the 65-degree weather in my Georgia pullover.
Yeah,
in a crowd of
and you didn't come over and say hello.
I know. Well, now I will. Hopefully next week.
He had a quick lock sign in the crowd behind you guys. Good for
I wish I would have seen that. I wish I would have seen that, because then I would have come over by you and give you a little love.
Maybe next week.
We'll make it happen. Hopefully.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to move on. We've been doing our college pick'em giveaway, tons of contestants in that, and we've been trying to give some advice every week on what we think they should plug in for those games. So we're going to switch it up a little bit and we're going to do a beat the bear. So we're going to try to beat you with what you're picking this week. We'll have our 3 picks. You have yours. Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Missouri, South Carolina. So we'll start with Oklahoma State at Kansas State. Kansas State's favored -1.5. Where are your thoughts there if you had to pick?
It's hard to pick this game right now, not knowing the status of Adrian Martinez, if he's going to play. It sounds like he has a really bad bruise, a bone bruise in his knee, which I think would make it difficult. In games like this, I just have to side with Mike Gundy. His teams, when the spread is within like 3.5, either way is a favorite or an underdog, he has an incredible winning percentage. They always seem to find ways to pull out these close games that are toss-up games going in. I think the momentum of the upset win coming back from 14 down last week against Texas, and now you got a team on the other end that kind of blew a big lead. You don't know if your quarterback's playing. I would lean towards Oklahoma State just based on the fact that I think with the backup quarterback, it might be tough for Kansas State to match them point for point.
Yeah, hard to go against Mike Gundy just because he's just been dominant against the spread. We're going to go with Kansas State on this one, though. Obviously,
perfect disagreement. We love disagreement.
To beat the bear, you have to disagree with the bear.
Exactly.
So that's what we're going with. Kansas State -1.5. We think that just not playing at home since October 1st, so almost 4 weeks, they're going to return home. We think the crowd's going to show up for the game. And regardless of if it's Adrian Martinez, obviously we'll feel a little better. But even if it's Will Howard, the backup, who got some good reps in last week, top team in TCU, we think Kansas State can show up to the test and pull out a big Big 12 win, which will hopefully put them in a good spot to make it to that Big 12 championship.
As long as TCU is occupying one of those, the big championship game for the 18-1 ticket.
Oh yeah, you're a big TCU. Yeah. I remember that from the summer. All right, so we'll move on to the border battle. Kentucky at Tennessee, spreads 11.5.
We talked about this with the Georgia-Florida game earlier about I think a lot of people are going to probably be looking towards playing Kentucky in this game just because of thinking Tennessee is going to be focused on the game next week. But I don't think there's really a whole lot of lost here between these two teams. And this is the type of game that Mark Stoops typically gets very fired up for as a big underdog. But as much as I love Mark and I'm friends with Mark and would love to see him go on the road and pull an upset, I just don't know here. I think you'll look at that offensive line that they've had. They have one of the worst sack rates allowed in the country when you look at like sacks per drop back and such. They got some good skill players on as well that can move. I mean, they probably would have beaten Ole Miss had number 2 not fallen. Brown slipped and fell on that long run.
Right.
But at the same time, I think it's going to be hard for Kentucky to match Tennessee point for point and the excitement that's going to be going on in that building on Saturday night. 11.5 feels like a little bit of a reduced number. You might, if you wait it out, if you like Tennessee, you might even be able to wait it out and maybe you'll get an 11 or a 10.5, because I think a majority of the people are going to land on Kentucky, which I can't fault, but I like the balls.
Yeah. Yeah, this certainly isn't on purpose, but I think we're rocking with Mark this week. Yeah. I mean, they're just against the spread against top-ranked teams, 3-0 against the spread against AP-ranked teams. Then they were 5-0-1 against top 5 teams in their last 6 matchups against top 5 teams. I gotta rock with Mark until he's not covering the spread against these teams. And maybe Tennessee still has that hangover from their victory, and then a good easy win last week. It wasn't really a test to what Kentucky will give them by any means.
Yeah, it's funny because I think people have been pointing to that ever since the Alabama game, where like this was like the perfect spot on the schedule for them to potentially have a little bit of a flat spot.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely a look-ahead game, like you were saying. Hopefully, if either Georgia or Tennessee, one of the two has a look-ahead, it's the team up in Knoxville. But like Mackenzie said, I could see this being a game where we're on our way back from Jacksonville back to St. Simon's Island, and we look at the score, and everyone's eyes kind of get a little bigger because they see it's a shootout going on in Knoxville.
Right.
I feel like late in the season, these SEC games between top 25 teams can sometimes be close and give people a little excitement for an upset. So
yeah, I wish you saw the way, and that happened, I guess, 2 years ago too, when A&M beat Bama. The way this team celebrates Bama's failure is like, we were all packed in this bar, and like this was literally the same as A&M. They kicked that final field goal, and everyone's like, like as if we just won. Like
it's so funny. It's like where the world unites against Bama.
I mean, we played Vandy, and people were selling their student tickets because it was the same 3:30 kickoff as Tennessee, and they wanted to be in a bar watching Tennessee. Bama instead of us blow out Vandy, which is fair, I guess.
and that's how the world is going to be cheering against Georgia on Saturday too. Well, welcome to the top of the mountain.
Yeah,
everybody's jealous of success. It's not really like hating your team. It's they're jealous of how good you are, and that's why they hate you.
Yeah, this is true. All right, so our last matchup, Missouri at South Carolina. South Carolina has 5 points. What do you think there?
I had South Carolina last week against A&M, and I'm very fortunate that they did win and cover. But I have a hard time back in South Carolina here with the point. Missouri, as you both saw, their defense can be very good against the run and cause some problems. They have just enough skill on offense to break a big play here or there. South Carolina's offense did not do a whole lot last week. They were outgained badly against a good A&M defense. I think that Missouri front will probably be a stout for them. That maybe South Carolina wins, but I'm not willing to lay that many points here. I like always talking about like the pros versus Joes type of game, like the public game of the week. Like this is going to be one of those games where you're going to look up and you're going to see like the ticket count is going to be totally skewed. Everyone's going to be on South Carolina because Missouri lost. Missouri didn't look good for us. South Carolina's ranked now. They beat A&M. Here they go. I'd be careful here, but I would look at taking Missouri plus the points.
All right. So if anyone knows that Missouri can show up to a big-time game and give a top 25 team a scare, it'd be us. Let's take South Carolina -5.
Just to be different, right? Just to make it all the 3 oppos. Perfect.
We're trying to beat the Bear. You can't win if it's 1-1-1. It's going to have to be 2-1 one-sided. But South Carolina, since the Georgia game, since the Georgia beatdown, I will add, they've been on a 4-game win streak. They've looked really good with playing some Beamer ball. But against the spread, they're 3-1. Why not keep up the hot streak? They won us some money against A&M last week in Cola. We'll take them laying the points again in this one.
All right.
It's funny because I mean, clearly you're not just picking opposite to pick opposite.
Right.
I was talking with Greg McElroy earlier in the week, and some of these bigger games, he was making a very good case for one side, and I would come on and make a very good case why I like the other side. So that's the beauty of what we do and why we bet and why we find value and like certain sides is like, and that's why they throw these numbers up here and. Because they know people are going to interpret them in two different ways, and they both can sound good going into a game, and you can make a very good case, and ultimately,
as long as you sound confident.
only one. I wouldn't be confident either.
But I mean, when we do, it's just the two of us back and forth every week for the pick. I'm like, we rarely end up agreeing on most of them, and we don't tell each other what we're picking or research, but It always ends
Yeah.
up that way somehow.
It's the same way with Steve and I as well on
Yeah.
our pod. Like we know we basically just start spitballing and talking about games and really have no idea
Mhm.
what way we're going to go.
Yeah. So to wrap it up, I was working Daily Wager all summer. You were always on with some kind of obscure bet player, athlete I've never heard of. What do you have for us this week outside of football, outside of pro sports, all of our main sports? What else are you cooking up this weekend?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have an updated tennis draw in front of me right now for Vienna and Basel, I believe, is where the ATP Tour is this week. But I am looking at the English Premier League for this weekend, and I would look at two things. I would look at going under 2.5 in the Fulham Everton match. Everton is a side that really doesn't score many goals at all, and they're going to Fulham. You would expect them to be a very defensive-minded team and looking to stay out of that relegation zone and come away with the points. So I would go look under 2.5 in Fulham Everton, and I would look at laying a 1.5 with Manchester City versus Leicester. City is going on the road, and it can be a difficult place to play. But at the same time, City, their last couple of matches, they lost 1-0 against Liverpool. They had the 0-0 draw in Champions League early this week. Kevin De Bruyne didn't play. They kind of sacked some guys because they were already through in Champions League. This could be a situation where they get right, and it wouldn't surprise me if they won this game, something along the lines of 3-1 or somewhere in there. So it's a Man City minus a 1.5 against Leicester, and then Fulham Everton under 2.5. That's those are my two football plays from the European, or I shouldn't even say European. I should say football as the rest of the world views it.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
You're speaking a different language
to
me.
Football, yeah.
We're going to disagree on the 3 football locks, but I can guarantee you I'll be riding those two football locks.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I got nothing against you there.
It's funny because people always talk about, like when we're talking about going to game day place for the first time and everything you've done. The best thing and the most enjoyment I ever had out of anything I have done at ESPN was being in South Africa in 2010 for 7 weeks for the World Cup down there. It was great, and I love soccer, and I miss having the opportunity to cover it. But I love watching it, and we'll be following the other games this weekend, the Champions League as they move on through the knockout rounds, and the World Cup coming up next month.
Yeah, and Taft might be over there himself for the World Cup, right?
Yeah, for the Women's World Cup in Australia next summer.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Yeah, that I had Women's World Cup in Australia.
Yeah,
and then 26 World Cup back here in the U.S. and then Euros over in Germany a couple of years. So some big the big tournaments are always great.